train.
Very beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. It's just long. Okay, all right, so we are live, David, correct? I believe so this is the panel on the day after, and I have the pleasure to have both colleagues that I've known for several years, Elliot Bomer, who is probably one of the foremost constitutional specialists. I mean, I'm pretty good with constitutions, but Elliot cleans me up. It's a pleasure to have him. And Mr. Jim Sillers, who needs no introduction, but I asked both of them. Elliot will be speaking about the Constitution and how a Constitution can be formed, and he'll explain it up to you. And Jim Sillers. And then Jim Sillers will be talking about kind of what needs to be done in terms of negotiation with the British state after, once, literally the day after, and the things that were certainly not taken into consideration, in the first referendum. So, either if you want to.
Sorry, can I ask you a question? If somebody's speaking, can they stand up just for a moment?
Okay, sure. Okay. So, do you have any preference? You want to go first?
I'm happy to do it. Yeah. So I'm going to use the podium. Just because. Just because I find it difficult to talk while sitting down, I need to move my arms and legs a little bit. So, hello everybody. Thank you for coming here on this beautiful Friday afternoon in Dunfermline. As Mark said, my name is Elliot. And I'm going to talk, we'll introduce as a riveting subject, but I'm going to talk to you about something really boring, right? Really boring. And there are many things in life that are really boring. Sewers is another one. Sewers are boring.
Necessary.
Exactly. Necessary. And nobody takes much interest in them until they start to stink. And it's a little bit like that with constitutions, I think, sometimes. That when a country has a good constitution that is working well, people have the luxury of not being able to pay much attention to it. It's a part of the infrastructure of the state. It's always subterranean, like sewage pipes. But we're not in a well-constituted country. We're in a country where, I would argue, we don't actually have a constitution in the way in which that word is properly understood. And therefore, we still have a constitution to form. And that's what I want to talk about today. What is a constitution? Why we need one? How we get one? And crucially, when to get one. Because there's a bit of a chicken and eggness in this, right? How do we create a state which has a constitution when we don't yet have a state? We can't have a state without a constitution because you need that from day one. So how do we untangle that? And that's what I'm going to try and address. First of all, what is a constitution? Well, the word is widely used. People will talk about the British Constitution or the constitutional implications of such and such a decision. I would argue that most of Europe and most of the Commonwealth and most of the world uses the word constitution in a very specific sense. A constitution is a supreme and fundamental law. Supreme because it is above ordinary laws. It is the law from which other laws derive their authority and the law by which other laws are constrained. It's harder to change than ordinary law. So different countries around the world have different constitutional amendment mechanisms. Constitutions can be changed, they're not set in stone forever, but generally they are harder to change than ordinary laws. And they are fundamental, in that they deal with the foundations, the fundaments of the state. Right? So that's things like, what is the state? What is the nature of the state itself? So some constitutions, historically, have declared the state to be a People's Soviet Socialist Republic. Some constitutions, historically, even today, declare the state to be an Islamic monarchy. Right? So there are different ways in which you can understand the nature of the state itself. In a Scottish context, hopefully we're not talking about those things, we're talking about a liberal democratic kind of state that defines the state. It sets out the rights of citizens. It will set out the fundamental relationship between the citizen and the state, the boundaries of state power. Also the territorial boundaries of state power are something that constitutions normally define. Who's inside, who's outside? What are the basic principles of citizenship? They deal with the question about how we're governed. Not particular policies necessarily, that's left to ordinary politics. Reasonable people can reasonably disagree about normal political things, but fundamentals like how often do elections take place? What's the electoral system? How is the government chosen? What does the head of state do? How are judges accountable? How is the Electoral Commission protected in its independence and neutrality? How is the civil service constituted? Those kinds of fundamental structural questions are things that a constitution deals with. So when we say that we don't have a constitution, what I mean is we don't have that kind of supreme and fundamental law by which the state is established. Instead, we have some sort of accumulation of history of normal statutes and custom and precedent, and we all sort of know what the rules ought to be because we're all good chaps, aren't we? Except that the fact that we don't necessarily know. Maybe there was a time when the British Constitution, as it then stood, and I'm using the word somewhat in inverted commas, was so widely accepted and so clear that it didn't matter that it wasn't written down anywhere in any supreme and fundamental law, because it was sort of inscribed on the hearts of men and women, mostly men, who were in positions of power. Who knew what the rules of the game were, they knew what the limits were, they weren't going to try to push the boundaries of their authority any further. Maybe that was once the case. I don't think many people today would look at the behaviour of recent British governments and conclude that that is still the case, if it ever was. Appreciate the appreciation of the humorous understatement. Thank you. So let's look at a couple of examples of that, right? And why we need to have this supreme and fundamental law, because in the absence of it, not only is egregious behaviour by those in power permitted, it's also quite difficult to actually define. We don't really know what the rules are. It's not just that they're broken or ignored, it's that they're actually unclear. Boris Johnson. Right, we're saying more about that. Boris Johnson. Sorry, the point is that when he was Prime Minister, he unilaterally changed the ministerial code so that the minister who was found to have lied to Parliament is no longer required to resign. Right? That is the flexible constitution. When people say to you, oh, we don't need a written constitution, it's too constraining, it's so much more flexible and adaptable to do it as we do, well, that's your response. It is flexible, but it's flexible in the interest not of the public, but of those who are in power. I'm not much of a sporty man, as you can probably tell from my physique. But imagine if the team in possession of the ball got to write the rules and appoint their own referees, right? It would be that sort of degree of imbalance in the high structures of the state. That's what we have. We talk about parliamentary sovereignty. Sovereignty? Sovereignty is a scary word. What that actually means is that there is no higher law binding upon Parliament itself. A government with a working majority majority in the House of Commons can essentially do whatever it likes. That should terrify us. When I tell that to my friends who come from, other European countries or other Commonwealth countries, most of them think that I must be joking. Because how can you live in a modern society, in a democratic society, where the government is not bound by rules that it cannot itself change? But those in power can make up the rules as they go along. It's handing over, very outdated 20th century technology, but it's like handing over a blank check. And just trusting that those who are in power are not going to abuse it. Look at recent election results in England. Look at the trajectory of politics and ask yourself, does that make you feel secure? Does that make you feel that you are adequately protected by the institutions of the state as a public entity of which you are a member, that is bound by rules that mean that no matter who gets into power, you're going to be protected? Or does it leave you actually feeling quite vulnerable? Makes me feel very vulnerable.
Yes.
So one of the things that a constitution does is it clarifies the rules. It also provides a mechanism for enforcing the rules. It also, because constitutions come from somewhere, and I'll talk about that in a moment, it also provides a way in which we, the people, can have a voice in making those rules. Because constitutions claim to come, and to some extent actually do come, from some sense of public engagement and public assent to the fundamentals by which we are governed. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to agree with everything the government does. Doesn't even necessarily mean they're going to agree with every particular part of the Constitution. There is no perfect Constitution. But at least we can agree, or be involved in the process of agreeing the supreme and fundamental rules by which we are to be governed. Doesn't that seem fair? If we're going to play a game, we're going to have some place in the negotiation of the rules of that game. Nobody created the institutions that we now have, right? That nobody really consented to them. They all solidified in a pre-democratic age, and then the right to vote was just sort of gradually extended. But there's never been that moment where we say, okay, who are we? What do we stand for? What will we not stand for? That's important. What will we not stand for? And how are we to govern ourselves? The constitution-making process is an opportunity to engage in that. The bit about who we are, I think, is very important as well, because the Constitution is in some ways a bit of a mirror of the society. It's a way in which we can reflect back those things that we do hold to be important, and we can say, there's a symbolic value in a Constitution. Maybe I'm getting a little bit into territory that Jim will expand upon later, but let's talk about the context of an independent Scottish state. That state has to broadcast something. The people who are establishing that state need to send signals to citizens and to an international audience about what sort of country we're going to be. Even if an independence referendum is held, and even if, say, 60% vote in favour, still 40% of people who are thinking, where do I fit into this? Do I still feel at home here? What about people with accents like mine? Right? So a constitution is a way of sending signals that reassure people. It's okay. Everyone's rights are going to be protected. Everyone's going to have some sort of baseline equality under the law, some voice and share in this democratic society that we're building together. And to international audiences, well, again, it shows what sort of country we want to be, what our aspirations are. And that's important. It's important for things like how we negotiate with Europe. It's important for maintaining other links that are important to many people across the British Isles and perhaps across the Commonwealth. That's the what, and that's the why. Now let's get to the how. We've talked about how a constitution is in some ways the voice of the people. Many constitutions, not just the US. Also, second point, if someone starts talking to you about constitutions and they say, what about the American Constitution and the Second Amendment? Just say, well, that's very true, and then redirect them quietly to constitutions in places like Ireland or Norway or Sweden, or the sort of places that we would actually look to for constitutional models, and not to the United States, right? I'm sure there were many problems with the Model T Ford. It probably was groundbreaking at its time, but it's all the time. If you were building a car today, you wouldn't build a Model T Ford. In the same way, if you were building a constitution today, you wouldn't look to the United States. But anyway, yes, yeah. But anyway, there is this we the people element. So how can the people, and let's just say hypothetically, we're talking about a medium-sized Northern European nation of about 5 million people. How do you get 5 million people to hold the pen together? Well, obviously that's difficult, right? There has to be some filtering mechanism, there has to be some way in which people who have some legitimacy, some electoral mandate to negotiate a constitution on behalf of people can come together and reach some sort of agreement that has political legitimacy. And that's a really key point, because anybody who is man enough can sit down for hours on end and write a constitution. I've done it myself. It's the words on the page don't have any meaning if I sit there in my study and say this is what I think should be in a constitution. They only have meaning and legitimacy because of the political agreement that they represent. So there has to be some structure for that. Now, countries do this in different ways. One of the things that Britain is really good at, and has done many times, and maybe people are a bit harsh about Britain in this room, but there's one thing that Britain is really good at. Anybody know what it is? No. Giving countries independence. Britain is really good. It's like many times there's a well-worn path for how this can happen. And if you go and watch old Cathay newsreels, you can see, minor royal flown out somewhere in a Land Rover, open top, driving around in a big stadium. The band plays, the flag goes down, the Union flag goes down, the flag of the independent country comes up, and then, the Duchess of I don't know where goes, and they hand over the constitutional instruments, right? Because when the British Empire gives up a colony, it always makes it look in the end as if that's what it intended all along. But they hand over the constitutional instruments, recognizing that the Constitution is a key statement. It's the fundamental charter, it's the title deed of statehood. How were those constitutions made? Well, most of those were negotiated, and they were negotiated in conferences between the major political parties of the country that were becoming independent. And in most cases, do you know what the trigger was for starting that process? And for the British government to say, we need to have a path for independence for this country? The election of a pro-independence majority to their legislature. The election of a pro-independence majority, in the vast majority of cases, was enough for the British governments of the 1950s, 60s, 70s and 80s to say, okay, we've heard, now it's time to negotiate for independence. When they did that, they put people together from different parties and they would negotiate the constitution. So that's one way to do it, is a conference of the major parties coming together. Sometimes that constitution was actually put to a referendum, like in Malta. Most of the time it wasn't. Most of the time it was just adopted then by the country's pre-independence parliament. and that was deemed as sufficient legitimation. Today, maybe we've moved on a little bit, we might see that as a bit elitist, a bit of a slightly top-down approach. I mean, do we really trust just the politicians? No, but there's a different degree of trust in politicians, perhaps, a little different degree of deference to politicians than there might have been a few generations ago. That sort of approach has lost favour in terms of to more participatory processes, right? So how else can you do it? Well, you can elect the Constituent Assembly. If you don't trust the existing politicians, you can elect new ones. And you can create a body which is intended for the express purpose of negotiating a constitution. It's not a parliament, it's a Constituent Assembly. Countries have done that. France did that, and Italy did that after the Second World War when they were rebuilding their democracies. South Africa did that in the 1990s. So that's another way. It can be fraught with difficulty though, because is that body going to actually replace the existing legislature? In which case, does it not just sort of, how do you disentangle constitution-making functions from ordinary legislative functions? It can be done, but it can take a long time. It took the Nepalese 8 years and 2 attempts to come up with a new constitution in 2015. Or is it alongside the existing parliament as a separate body, but then you have sort of competing mandates, right? And that can be very difficult. And that's what happened in Chile. Chile is a fascinating example where they elected a special body to write a constitution. It was then rejected in a referendum. They elected another body to write a completely different constitution. It was also rejected in a referendum. So everybody stuck with the constitution they had in the first place, which people agreed is the least bad deal. Maybe not a bad outcome, right? But that's the second approach, is to have this directly elected body. The third approach is to do something that may be somewhere between the two. Not just use your existing politicians, not elect some sort of separate body with a lot of fanfare, but maybe have some wider constitutional convention. That's a good word. Probably some old folks here, for whom the word convention still has some resonance. And you can bring together politicians from different parties. You can bring together other actors in civil society, and you can try and hammer out a constitution that has the political buy-in. Right? You can't cut the politicians out of the process. Iceland tried to do that in the 2011-2012 process. They said, we want to have a crowdsourced constitution, we want to cut the politicians out of it. What do you think the politicians did? They killed it. Right? So we have to be very grown up about this. We have to be very realistic. You can't cut the politicians out of the process, but maybe you don't leave it just to the politicians either. You create some sort of body. You can have a statutory foundation for that. You can have a constitutional transition act. And in the Constitutional Transition Act, you can provide for a constitutional conference. You can give that body a mandate. You can give it a terms of reference. You can give it a deadline. You can give it a budget. You can give it a secretariat. Right? Because it's probably going to want to go and do some public consultation. Engage with the public a little bit on particular issues. You might even want to give it the ability to hold a citizens' assembly of some sort. Citizens' assemblies are a terrible institution for actually writing a whole constitution, because we were like a randomly selected body, because they can't do that political negotiation. But they're a brilliant institution for settling specific points and coming up with something that says, oh, well, we don't know what to do about this, but we've held a citizens' assembly on this point, and we think this is the way that's going to give us the best consensus. So you can have this Constitutional Transition Act, and then at the end of it, you get a constitution, and then with appropriate fanfare, you can bring this constitution into effect. But when? When to do this if there isn't yet an independent state in which to do it? That seems to be a challenge, not least because until there is an independent state in which to do it, you can't get those who don't agree in principle with that independent state to engage in the process.
Can I say something?
I'm on a roll. Will it wait until I finish? And then I'm very happy to take questions, and there may well be all sorts of nuance and criticism of what I have to say, but I'm telling you the main sort of thrust of it is it's quite difficult, I think, to have that conversation about the future constitution of, let's say, an independent Scotland, when, let's be generous here, somewhere between a third and half of the population are not remotely interested in having that conversation at this point. But they will also be fellow citizens. They also have to find this state legitimate. Because if they don't, the state becomes independent with a crisis of legitimacy from day one. And that's not a good thing. We're talking about day one. Constitution on day one already has to have that legitimacy. Now, it may well be that if there is a certain inevitability behind independence, if there is a certain momentum towards it, people who at the moment are not engaged in that conversation will feel a desire to be drawn into it. That might be the case. But I think we need to get there, in part because one-sided constitutions never work. Ideological constitutions that don't represent some deep compromise in society generally fail. I mean, Spain is a brilliant example of this. Spain, back in the 1930s, adopted this very progressive, democratic, republican, secular constitution. What happened? Half the population weren't on board with it. They ended up with a military coup, a civil war, for 40 years of dictatorship. 1978, they have another go, and this time they do it in a slightly more moderate, a little bit more compromising way, build that consensus across the political divide, and they've had 40 years of peace, prosperity, and economic development. So we have to get that bit right, and it's quite hard to do that sort of beforehand. On the other hand, we can't wait until afterwards, because otherwise we become independent without a constitution. And that just puts sovereign power in the hands of Holyrood instead of Westminster, which carries on all the same problems. And I don't think we've achieved anything by that. I mean, maybe, but I would be just as worried, particularly in a potentially resource-rich country, and a strategically, in a geostrategically relevant part of the world, I would be very concerned about that. So we need to get something in place before day one, but it's really hard to do it before day one. The way in which I had long proposed this, I wrote a paper for Commonweal back in 2018, which then fed into a Scottish Government white paper that I think was published in 2022, in which I set out a two-stage process. And this actually came out of conversations that happened before the first referendum that I had with the then First Minister. And the idea was to have an interim constitution. A constitution that would be developed kind of in-house as a basic, skeletal, kind of training wheels constitution. And that's the constitution that would come into effect on day one of independence. And then there would be a post-independence constitution building process to say, okay, well, we've got something in place, but let's actually build upon that, and we'll then get the rest of the people involved and try and come up with a permanent constitution during the 5 years after independence. As time's gone on, I've become a little less convinced that that's the only or the best way to proceed. And the reason for that is, I think there's going to be a lot going on in those first 5 years after independence. There's going to be a lot to do, and maybe that's not the right opportunity to do major constitution building. So what do we do? Well, maybe there's a case actually for doing some of the constitution building now. Maybe now, today, is the time to start thinking about not just the idea of creating an independent state, but what sort of state on a constitutional level we wish to create. And bearing in mind the difficulty, we're going to have to bring people into that conversation, right? And that might mean some people who, would never be in a room like this. And that is a political challenge that political leaders will have to grapple with. But I think there's something to be said for saying, well, let's do the work now. Let's create that body that can do those negotiations. There's no reason why we can't do that without independence. We can do that before independence. We can do that even if independence remains a somewhat distant prospect. But maybe then, rather than talk in the abstract, we can say, do you know what? Boris Johnson's just changed the ministerial rules. Under our draft constitution for an independent Scotland, he wouldn't be able to do that because this is how the ministerial code would be changed. Or, did you hear that thing about how that they put these new rules on the electoral commission, which has given the government more control over the electoral commission? Isn't that a bit dangerous? Well, in our draft constitution that we've negotiated through the Scottish Constituent Assembly, that wouldn't be permitted because here's the provisions on the electoral commission and here are the guarantees of its independence. And maybe that then becomes not just this boring foundation sewage pipe infrastructure for a future state, but maybe it becomes something that you can actually talk to people about and get them excited about and relate it to how they live and how they relate to the country in which they live and the state by which they are governed. Thank you.
Yeah, can I raise the issue of assuming that Scotland is not a sovereign country, which you seem to have assumed?
So I think there's I understand exactly where that question is coming from, and I think there is
Coming from the facts.
Well, it's coming from a particular interpretation of the facts, right? It's coming from a particular interpretation of the facts. If Scotland were a sovereign country, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. There is a moral claim to sovereignty which the state in which we live, okay, but the state in which we live does not acknowledge that claim. So even if you're right, the state in which you live doesn't recognize you as right. You can assert it, but you are asserting it as a moral claim. As I understand it, one of the functions of the Scottish independence movement is to turn that claim into a legal right. We have not yet done that.
I disagree.
Well, you can, but there isn't a court that, with the rule of recognition of what is law, that would reaffirm that belief. So until that belief can be translated into something that is recognised in law, it is simply a claim. It may well be a valid claim, it may be a true claim, but it is an unrecognised claim. What the Constitution would do is give recognition to that claim by its proclamation of popular sovereignty. I'm going to just go on one more step with that, which is, there is this argument also that Scotland already has a constitution.
Yes.
Right? And this argument has gained a lot of weight and become very current. And I'm going to upset some people here, but frankly it's nonsense. It is ahistorical, legally illiterate, well-meaning nonsense. What I will accept is that there are some very interesting Scottish proto-constitutional documents from which certain principles that would be worthy of inclusion in a written constitution can be derived. And I think you can look back on things like the Declaration of Arbroath and the Claim of Right as setting out meta-constitutional principles. But they're not a constitution because they don't do the things that a constitution does. They do not provide that supreme and fundamental law that regulates the institutions of the state. Nothing in those documents.
It's suppressed. It is a constitution, and it is suppressed.
Frankly, I disagree.
Can I?
Because it is not a constitution in the sense that the constitution we're trying to build is a constitution.
Can I say something? A constitution is a very modern construct. Now, in that time, we've been colonized. And what we have serves as what would become a constitution. We haven't been able to do that officially as a constitution because of being colonized. But the constitution in itself is a modern construct.
Constitutions are a modern, constitutions as we know them today are largely a modern construct. It's actually a very English idea. If you want to go back to the agreement of the people that came out of the Leveller movement in the civil wars. This idea of a supreme and fundamental law that's binding upon Parliament itself. We have not developed that because the state has not modernized to that extent. That because of this gradual evolution, the United Kingdom, the British Empire, well actually not the Empire, because the Empire did modernise during its transition to the Commonwealth. The United Kingdom itself never went through that 19th and 20th century process of constitutional modernity. So we're still living in a pre-modern state, which is why we don't have a constitution. But the idea that these medieval documents are themselves a constitution is a misunderstanding. Let's give it a charitable construction. It is a misunderstanding of the nature of the function and form of a constitution.
Can we move on, Chairman?
Jim, please.
Can I remind everyone of a very uncomfortable fact? We were indisputably sovereign as a people. Between between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. on the 18th of September 2014. We were indisputably sovereign, and the majority of our citizens decided to hand it back. That is the position that we are in, and we have to reverse. Before I deal with my stuff, can I just say that I'm very happy to share a platform with Elliot on the Constitution. If we're going to win independence, it won't be done by the people at the moment who favour independence. It will be done by us convincing a fairly substantial number of present-day unionists to join us, to give us a majority. And the idea of a written constitution giving people constitutional rights would be the central pillar of our persuasion. And it's got to be persuasion to bring people over to our side. Because what a written constitution does, it hands power to the ordinary citizen. Now, some folk laugh disparagingly when the United States was mentioned. The US Constitution came from the minds of great men who thought very deeply and argued a long time before it was established. Who, whichever faults it may have, it has on frequent occasions given the ordinary citizen the ability to go to a Supreme Court and defeat the United States government and have their rights. And if we have a draft, whatever may we may produce it, if we have a draft constitution and tell people this is the central pillar of the new Scottish state, and these are your rights within it, it will go a long way to actually being able to persuade unionists, some of them at the moment teetering on the brink, to come in our direction. Now, I want to talk to you in a concept that is a very rare one in Scotland, and that's the concept of states' rights and states' interests. There are three things that matter in international relations, and have done since about 1500 BC, when the Amara civilization emerged in what we would call parts of the Middle East. That's when scholars believe the international system of relations between what was then kingdoms, now states, actually began to develop. And there are three verities that haven't changed from that time: geography, state interests, and spheres of influence. And we've got to think, if we want a Scottish state, we've got to start thinking in Scottish state interests. And that's the background concept about what I'm about to talk on. Now, there are 4 steps to independence. First is building a big vote. Secondly is actually translating that into electoral success, so we can show to the rest of the world the credibility of our claim to independence. Now, the next step, it's nice and easy, that's after we've forced the referendum. The 4th step is critical, because that will determine how successful the independent Scotland is with its parliament and government and constitution in at least the first decade of independence. Because let's assume we're independent Thursday night, say last night, and we win the vote. Scotland isn't independent this morning. There's about a year and a half of negotiations to independence vesting date. And then between us winning the referendum and vesting date, we are engaged in negotiations with England. There has to be a treaty setting out our new relationships. Now, this is I was on a Zoom meeting with some people, and a guy said, "What do you mean, treaty with the English?" And I said, "Well, this is how it happens. When the UK left the EU, Brexit didn't happen the morning after, there has to be negotiations." And he said, "F the English." Now, the problem is you can't do that even if you felt like it. Because we've been integrated, well, let's take post-war, forget the 300 years, post-war, 1945, to the present time, a very modern economy. We've had a large degree of integration. It represents 60% of our, quote, foreign market at the present time. There's folk with relatives up and down different parts of this island of Great Britain. So we have to sit down and have a treaty. The worst thing for us is to wait until Friday morning to say, "Oh my God, we better get a brief, a negotiating brief to negotiate." Because we will be negotiating with a British/English establishment that are past masters of this negotiation. Go and read the history, the written, published history of MI5. And all the colonies came to Lancaster House and had their negotiations, apparently opening. All their bedrooms were bugged by MI5. The British negotiators knew exactly. So one of the first things we have to decide, where do the negotiations take place? London or Edinburgh? Now, you wouldn't get them agreeing to Edinburgh all the time, but we should never agree to London all the time. So, the location actually does matter. That's a minor matter compared to the others. Let me quote you this is just out of my mind, this is not necessarily the definitive list. These are some of the broad issues that require detailed examination and preparation well before the day we win the referendum. A hard or a soft border. That will depend on how the negotiations on trade and free movement go. Do we remain in the present customs union with England? If so, who makes the rules in the future? Somebody said certainly not. But, have we thought about it? Have we thought about extracting ourselves from the customs union almost immediately? Or is there a transitional period during which we're in it? These, we haven't even thought about them. But we better start thinking about them now. Do we seek a free trade agreement? And if so, what constitutes a free trade agreement between us and England? Do we want one? Maybe not. But if we do, what do we think it should constitute? What will be the relationship between the Scottish financial services industry and the City of London, which is pretty tied up at the moment between one and the other? How do we untangle that without untangling that to our disadvantage? Setting mutual agreements on acceptable standards in food products and animal welfare, because we sell south of the border and we get from south of the border. Settling a question of agricultural subsidies in relation to trade. It's perfectly possible to imagine a situation where we give much higher subsidies to uphill farmers in Scotland, where we get more acreage of that than, say, south of the border. Would that be acceptable to the English in our trading relations? If not, what do we do about it? That's the broad ones. Then we get down to the division of assets and liabilities. There will be a division of assets and liabilities, but what the hell's an asset and what the hell's a liability? We need to define what an asset is and a liability. And bear in mind, England's got skin in this game the same as us. Here are some examples in the real estate pile. Is the Tower of London a UK asset to which we are entitled to 8 or 9% of its retail value? And it's a big retail. What about Buckingham Palace? Now this is serious. Is Buckingham Palace a UK asset as distinct from Windsor Castle, which is a private asset of the royal family? It's big real estate stuff in London, right bang in the middle of London. What's it worth? Do we get 8 or 9%? Or what's the argument against us getting 8 or 9%? Kensington Palace falls into the same category. What about the Palace of Holyrood? Is it a purely Scottish asset or is it a UK asset?
King Charles has got that one now.
Well, he'll go get in the negotiations then. What about the National Museum in London? Is that a UK asset? I don't know, but that's the kind of thing we have to think about and decide upon. because what are the total UK assets that we are entitled to a share of is going to be extremely important. And it can't give us, the bricks and building, it will be cash in the Scottish Treasury. And what about the crown jewels? Are these UK state assets? And if so, what's their value? And we'll take 8 or 9% of the value. Or how do we deal with it? Now, not in dispute about what is a UK asset are all the embassies and consulates throughout the world. Now, we won't be able to accept or expect in negotiations the English to say we are abandoning our embassies and consulates. They will remain United Kingdom embassies and consulates, hunky-dory. But what is the asset value of each of them in each location they are, and what is 8 and 9% of that total value? Elliot's been in Egypt. You remember the British Embassy? It's huge. It's one of the biggest in the world. And it must be worth a huge amount in real estate terms. Now, then we come to the really contentious stuff. Oil and gas. Now, we say it's yours. But they come along and say, well, wait a minute, it was done by our licensing, it was done by our laws, it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done this, that, and the next thing. So we have to have a position on oil and gas, well thought out position on oil and gas. Then we come to the either acceptance or repudiation of our share of the national debt. And that's not as simple as you think. What is the national debt? Under quantitative easing, you have the ridiculous position of the Bank of England, a British state institution, buying the bonds of the British government, and the British government paying interest to the Bank of England, its own state institution. So when it comes to the question of quote the national debt, we have to know what the hell we're talking about. And we have to know what they think they're talking about as well. Now you can start from the position, we're taking nothing. We're going to be debt free. But you're in negotiations, and down the line, there's things that they can do that will be uncomfortable for us. So there's a huge amount of work to be done just on that one item alone. Because at the moment, the national debt, as defined officially, is heading for £3 trillion. But let's know the real national debt. If you look at what they call off-the-book stuff, PFI, some stuff the Bank of England knows for 195 billion, you come to a national debt that's near 4.6 trillion. Do we want to say that some of that's ours and some of that's not ours? This is where expertise will actually have to be employed in producing the negotiating brief. We haven't even started to negotiate yet, by the way. If you follow it, these are the things that we need to look at now. I'm talking about the Scots. Now, what about
the Parliament of the people?
Well, this is going to be done. This will have to be done by a group of experts. Well before we campaign for independence, by the way. And they will have to provide a brief to the politicians and their technical people who then go to sit across the table from the English negotiating team. And I'll come to it in a minute or two. What's our share of foreign currency reserves? And that'll be important on the currency issue, which I'll come to. And how do we deal with the scientific establishments, which are actually in many ways fairly well integrated at the moment? We do stuff, and how do we deal with that? Do we maintain that kind of all British Isles involvement of the scientific community in certain things they do and how they're funded, or don't we do it? We haven't even thought of doing that at the present time. Then we come to people. Do we want dual nationality or not? Do we want free movement? If we want free movement, then that brings us into the area of immigration laws. But let's assume we say, well, we're for free movement, up and down, go to Blackpool for the Illuminations Day Club or whatsoever, you can go up to Edinburgh after the festival, happy to see you, all that sort of thing. But suppose the illegal immigration problem is still involved in England, and we've got free movement, and we have a much more liberal immigration policy because there are certain people we would like in our community, and the English say, "Hey, but wait a minute." You arrive at Edinburgh Airport, you're in a taxi or a hired car, and you drive down and see us. Now, we're not having that. That's the kind of nitty-gritty that we will be involved in the negotiations, which isn't easy to solve. Is it hard border, soft border, free movement? Sounds great, but can they put a hard stop on the soft border if things get too difficult, with us being the conduit for people who don't want to come to Scotland but actually want to come to England? Then we've got things like civil service pensions. Every time there's been a break-up in colonial, there's always been very, very careful accommodation for the civil servants who are operating under a system that has now changed. Why should they be punished for the change that's taking place? Then there's the state pension. I don't think the independence movement's done a great deal of work on the state pension. What qualifies? I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme. There's no fund that we can say we want 8 to 9% of that fund. I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme. My grandchildren are paying for my pension at the present time. So that's another area where we've got to bring in expertise to decide how we handle that. And that will be quite important in getting the pensioners' vote when you come to a referendum, something that we totally ignored last time to our cost. Now I come to what I call the big one. This is where state interests, geography, spheres of influence come into play. We have to be realistic. We are 5 million people seeking independence, and we are not masters wholly of our fate. There are other people with skin in the game, under state interests and spheres of interest, and because, Elliot mentioned it, our geopolitical position in the NATO defensive strategy. Scotland is an unsinkable aircraft carrier from which we can stop the Soviet Northern Fleet exiting into the North Atlantic and destroying any possibility of convoys back and forth in a difficult situation, even if it's not absolute conflict. So we have to take into account that the United States, we are in the US spheres of influence. Wish we weren't, but geography and the US interest places us within their sphere of influence. We are in NATO's sphere of influence. Without us, there's a big, big gap in their defence strategy. And it's uncomfortable, but happens to be a truth. We've been in England's sphere of influence since the 13th century, and will remain in England's sphere of influence, even if we are independent on this island of Great Britain. Because for the first time in 300 years, there's going to be 2 states with possibly different state interests and a border in between. That's the new position. And England's going to always be worried. It's like 1707 all over again. 1707 happened because they had to close the border, and bring us in, and France's influence was no more. I always get, I think it's always ironical. The Scots get all sentimental about the old alliance with France. France used us, cost them nothing, and we got gubbed time after time after time being in that position. Now we come to the negotiations. The Institute of Government, or Management, I can't remember just which one, down in England, in 2021, when it looked as if Scotland was heading towards independence, commissioned two academics, one to look at debt and one to look at currency. And academic work, very, very good. The one on currency said that, yes, an independent Scotland would have to have its own currency if it was to be genuinely sovereign. There was a problem that we have no international track record as an independent government with economic stability and a currency that you could rely upon. And what was crucial to that was how government operated and conducted itself in terms of stability. Like Germany, bear in mind that all currency is fiat currency. We went off the US gold standard in 1972. It's all fiat currency. And fiat currency is paper with no intrinsic value whatsoever. The day you go into the butcher's shop with a £10 note for a bit of meat, and he doesn't believe that's worth a damn, you'll not get any meat in the basket. That's what happens in Zimbabwe. The folk don't believe in the currency any longer. So it's fiat currency we're talking about. And one of the things that was required is a good backing of foreign currency reserves, gold, dollars, euros, yen. This is 2021 figures. What this academic estimated was that we required 47 billion of foreign currency reserves. But our proportionate share was only 17 billion. So we've got 30 billion. And I've said this to audiences elsewhere. I'm sitting on this side of the table, the English person's on the other side of the table, and says to me, I hear you've got a problem with foreign currency reserves. After we EU, you're proportionate. I'll tell you, we can help solve it. 50-year lease on fast lane. Right, what am I supposed to say? Bear in mind, national interests. It's in our national interest to have our own currency. That marks out whether you're sovereign or not sovereign. It's in our interest, national interest, to have our own currency with reserves that mean we're not under any financial crises for the first critical decade after independence. What do I say? Now, I have opposed fast lane and nuclear weapons all the days of my life. The very first speech I ever made as an individual was at the Fire Brigades Union Conference in 1961, where I was the main speaker to the main motion, just a young fireman I was, on against the bomb. I've always been against it. And I'm sitting this side of the table with all the emotional investment I've made over the years. And the guy at the other side of the table says, I can solve your major problem by giving us a lease for 50 years. That's the kind of difficult question we have to answer. And it's the kind of difficult thing that arises when we're actually at the negotiating table. And we, as an independence movement, have to do that work now. And it's not easy work. Instead of me feeling emotional about having invested my life against the bomb, I've got to be ice cold in terms of state interests in the answer I give them. And at the moment, the answer I would give them would be, okay, we'll work it out. But other folk will say, no, under no circumstances, that's so fundamental, and then we've got a problem. So I haven't come here to solve the problems. What I've come here this afternoon to do is telegraph the problems to you and others in the movement that we have to look at now to get a briefing. And that briefing, even if independence is 5 years away, will have to be constantly upgraded annually because the world is changing quite significantly. All I've dealt with is between us and England. But we've got other interests as well. Where do we fit into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement? Where do we fit into the European Union or the European Free Trade Agreement? These are all matters that we will have to settle before that vesting date when we say, at last, Scotland's independent. So there's a huge challenge to the movement, both of what Elliot said, which is absolutely critical to us winning over the unionist vote, and critical about how we successfully conduct the negotiations. And bear in mind, negotiations is give and take. We have to define what England means to us economically. They will be defining what we mean to them economically. They will have red lines beyond which they will not go. We have to have red lines beyond which we shall not go. And it's in that intervening space that the negotiations will take place. That's what we've got to prepare for now.
I'm sure we'll have multiple questions, and yes. Just 1 second.
There are a wide range of issues that we're going to have to negotiate with the UK government about, but two of them we don't. One of them is currency and the other one is pensions. We don't need to negotiate about currency because we can create our own. What we need to do, rather than prepare negotiating with the UK government, is to prepare our own for our own central bank and the creation of our own interbanking payment system. If we do that, we don't need to negotiate with them about currency. And we don't need to negotiate with them about pensions either, because we can pay for our own pensions if we've got our own currency. And in any case, even if we didn't have our own currency, Scotland collects enough revenue in national insurance contributions in Scotland to pay for the state pension paid in Scotland. Those figures are in Jersey. So I think a couple of years ago, there were 11.5 billion collected in national insurance contributions and 8.5 billion paid out in pensions. So I don't think we need to negotiate with the UK about either currency or pensions. Plenty of other things, but not those two.
No, I don't agree. I think I've looked at the work done. The amount of foreign reserves we get, I'm not against our having a central bank. It's what foreign currency reserves our central bank will have in order to make sure that our currency is not a weak one that can be attacked by the international financial community. That's where the foreign currency reserves matter. Setting up your own currency is no problem. I mean, Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia did it after years of being in the Soviet Union. Folk have done it with much less resources than us. That's true. Setting it up is no great problem. But we kid ourselves on that it's easy if foreign currency reserves don't matter. Unfortunately, they do matter, as several UK governments have found over my lifetime.
Jim?
Let's have Tim ask his question, because he's there.
It's Tim Rideout, the convener of the Scottish Currency Group. I'm going to suggest that Jim and I have a meeting and perhaps a workshop about the currency question. So I think we have answered all your questions. if we tackle, I mean, there's many things that you've raised. I was going to talk about assets and liabilities and the continuing state model, but I'll speak to you about that separately. But just to tackle the currency and the foreign reserves question, at the present time, the UK's foreign reserves are about 80 billion US dollars. So if we claimed 8% of that, you're talking about less than 8 billion US dollars. It's peanuts. It's neither here nor there in the general scheme of things. And in fact, there's approximately £7 billion worth of Bank of England notes and coins in Scotland, which will be handed into the Scottish Reserve Bank and replaced by new Scottish pounds. So that's 7 billion of GB pounds that becomes foreign reserves of Scotland right away. That's bigger than we would get from trying to claim a percentage of the Bank of England. Now, I think we should go with the continuing state model by which everything that belongs to England stays English. What is physically in Scotland becomes Scottish, and that solves a lot of what you talked about first off. That's what happened with the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's what the Treasury said that was going to happen it's what the Treasury said was going to happen in 2014, because they published a paper saying that the UK was going to adopt the continuing state model, with the difference that they went for the cake and eat it scenario, by which the continuing state model would apply to the assets and they would take all of them, and the not continuing state model would apply to the liabilities, which would be shared, which was a sort of rather typical London approach. But coming back to the foreign reserves, our estimates are that the net proceeds of issuing the new currency after the sterling liabilities have been repaid, so that's our mortgages, credit cards, things like that. So the currency that we currently possess in our bank accounts and so on, handed in, the GB pound mortgages, credit cards and whatever settled, ends up with the Scottish Reserve Bank having approximately £50 billion worth of foreign reserves left. So,
What rate, what's the relationship between the Scottish currency and sterling? Bearing in mind that a lot of the Scottish financial industry clientele is actually south of the border. You know, that's where they get, where they sell their products.
yeah, well, I mean, obviously the stock market is still going to be in London, so the investments all stay as they are in GB pounds. Somebody like Baillie Gifford, the funds are all going to stay in GB pounds because that's where the investments are. If the clients are in England, that all stays, you know, for a company like Baillie Gifford, then everything's probably pretty much going to stay US dollars, GB pounds, euros, and the only thing that becomes Scottish pounds is going to be the wages and the rent. So I think in terms of the international business of the Scottish financial sector, the introduction of the currency would have very little effect on that, so long as they have the sort of same right as, say, a German company has to trade in England or a US company. The problem would come if England refused to allow people in England to buy services from a Scottish company. They could obviously then set up a subsidiary in England and trade through a subsidiary in England, you know, much as say.
That'd be one of the negotiating terms.
Yeah, I mean that's access to the English market is an important issue.
Yeah.
But I think the Scottish Currency Group at the moment, we commissioned Professor Thibault Lorenjoy from the Aalborg Business School in Denmark, who's a French economist, did work for the Welsh government on the currency plan for Wales, and he's at the moment doing a 18-month project for us to come up with the currency plan and policy proposals for an independent Scotland. He'll be giving an interim report at our conference in this venue in October the 26th, 27th, with a final report to follow in October 2026. And it's our intention that that will be the definitive plan for currency, and the answer that the Scottish government has dismally failed to come up with. I mean, I agree entirely with Jim that the Scottish Government, the SNP leadership, has not addressed the issues. They have not done the work. And in fact, the Welsh Government has done a lot more. You know, Professor Lorenjoy, we came across because he was commissioned by the Senate under the influence of Plaid Cymru to write a currency plan for Wales that, you know, makes the Scottish Government's white paper from October 2022 look like a kindergarten scribbling.
Yeah.
You know, the Welsh Government also commissioned a report on the EFTA EU issue, the matter of pensions in Wales, the likely fiscal balance for the Welsh Government. You know, they looked at these in serious ways. They had international experts from outside Wales who actually wrote these reports. I think it was a professor from Trinity College in Dublin who looked at the relationship with the European Union for them. So, you know, we need to do the work. We're doing the currency question. I'll speak to Jim afterwards rather than waste all your time now. But I think, you know, there are a lot of difficult questions. I think, you know, you've covered a few of them. I think there are a lot more.
Oh, yeah, a lot more.
I'm hoping that my branch of the SNP is going to put forward a resolution to the October conference to reverse the SNP's policy on NATO and to scrap that idea. I think NATO's dead anyway. And you know, move to having go back to what we were before 2012 of being like Ireland and non-aligned. So, you know, we can have that to look forward to on October the 11th at the SNP conference.
Elliot,
Anyway,
would you like to?
that's enough from me.
If I may then, I want to pick up on something that was said just there about the use of expertise. And that, I think, is something that is really lacking in just the seriousness of this whole movement. And it comes from the top. But if there is a serious commitment to state building, then that ought to be reflected in a willingness to invest and to back this kind of work and to hire people who have international and comparative expertise that they can bring to bear on all these different aspects of the problem. And I don't see that. I don't even see, like, there's a couple of well-meaning, chronically underfunded organizations that are doing a little bit around the edges, and some of that work is very good, but there isn't the commitment. I mean, let's put £5 million. It's not a lot of money. It's really not. It's probably a lot of money to most of us here, but it's not a lot of money. But let's start with £5 million into a foundation that is going over the next 5 years to start £1 million a year. That's not very much. It's going to need more than that, but it's seed money. But that's the kind of scale of investment that I think we need to start to take this seriously. Jim, I loved your presentation. I think it was one of the most realist presentations of the challenge that lies ahead that I've ever heard. I haven't heard anybody in Parliament. I didn't know whether you made such a speech when you were in Parliament, but I haven't heard in recent years anybody in Parliament make that kind of speech. But I think it's the kind of speech that the political culture is probably mature enough now for the general public to respond. The media won't, right? The media won't. The media would be all over a speech like that. The SNP won't. But I think maybe I have a naive faith in the sort of sensibleness of ordinary people. But to me, that is much more compelling than, oh, it'll all be fine. Because we've been down the oh, it'll all be fine route, right? We know what that looks like. We know what it looks like to say, oh, we'll worry about all of this later, just vote for this and we'll work it out. And it causes years of chaos. So I think that sort of realistic presentation of the scale of the challenge, all of these things can be done, but we need to work at it. And what we don't have, to me, looking at this whole movement, and I've been involved in this not for as long as some people here, but certainly for a good part of 15 years now, we don't have an institution. We don't have the body that's going to do that work. And I think if we really want to make some progress, that is where I think we need to concentrate right now, in where are we going to get the body that's not just under the SNP's thumb or under the Scottish Government's thumb. It needs to have that functional independence, but it needs to have people's ear so it can feed into the policy-making process. It needs to have the resources, it needs to have the structure, it needs to have the expertise. I don't know where we can get that, but I think that's what's missing to me.
I think, well, some of what you've been saying is really what I was going to say too. I think we should be prepared to look around at the expertise that we already have in Scotland in many of these areas, where a lot of thinking, good thinking, and a lot of discussion has taken place and is taking place. And the first example of this I was going to give was Tim Rideout. I didn't realise he was sitting behind me here, but he's just an example of someone who is, you know, so up there with his knowledge about currency and banking and financial matters. I think it's just been a privilege to have him here with us today. I was also thinking about Commonweal. Now, they've put a lot of energy and a lot of money into researching and coming up with good policies. And I think that's the sort of grouping. I'm sure if we went around, folks here, you would know of other people too that are good examples of leading groups who are actually taking things forward. So, yeah, I would agree with a lot of what you were saying there, but actually I don't feel so pessimistic about it that it would hold us back for pushing and going for independence just with all we've got. Because if you're fearful of taking a step forward because this could happen, that could happen, why are we all here? You know, we want it. We want it. This is history. This is going to be a huge thing for the next generation and the generation after that, long after all of us are away. This is for all of us in Scotland today and those to come. So let's not be fearful about it. Let's get what we need. Let's get the thinking underway. Let's be practiced in it. Let's be well aware of who we're negotiating with, but not to be afraid of them.
I couldn't agree more. In 1986, when things were pretty grim, I wrote a book called The Case for Optimism. And 2 years later, we had the Govan by-election. And what I did in 1986 was analyse why the mistakes had been made between 74 and 79 and what we could do. I've just sent a new book to a publisher called The New Case for Optimism. Because the argument of 2014 has changed in our favour. What the Unionists argued successfully in 2014 was that we, small 5 million, had to shelter under the umbrella of the big, economically powerful United Kingdom. 5th largest economy, now the 6th largest economy. Nobody could sustain that position today. I'll quote you from the Daily Telegraph. The United Kingdom is a poor country pretending to be rich. I get the English Tory papers because I was brought up by Ayrshire socialists who told me, always try to think how the other side thinks, understand them. And all right through the English papers. In fact, get the Spectator this week. There's an article in the Spectator that everybody should read. It's about just how broken it is south of the border. Now, I don't rejoice in that. I've got relatives south of the border. I am taking the state interest, hard, ice-cool examination. The argument is, unfortunately, 5 million cannot save 58 million south of the border. We can save ourselves. We've got to escape from what is manifest failure. And if you look at the English state, all the pillars that hold up the institutions that hold up the English state are actually crumbling. If you look at monarchy, it's a soap opera. If you look at the Church of England, it's in crises. If you look at the Metropolitan Police, it's corrupt. If you look at the Army, Navy and Air Force, they couldn't defend Cornwall, never mind anything else. You go right through. The BBC, no longer that great institution. They're all crumbling. And it simply cannot reverse the decline that has taken place. So we have a case for optimism. There's lots of people in the movement, like Tim, doing great stuff, good material. What we lack is a national organisation that can bring everything together and put it out to the people. Because although the currency group are doing a lot of work, if I chapped the door the night, they'd never have heard of it. And yet it's critical. Never heard of a constitution, but it's critical. Never heard, I mean, you take oil and gas. I think it's criminal for us to say that we wouldn't use oil and gas. Because if we're going to reconstruct the Scottish economy, and we'll have to reconstruct it, we will need capital. And that black stuff is capital. We don't own a cupful. So we should be working out, how do we get, not just the taxation, but actually how do we get a share, that's all we're asking for at the moment, is a share of the black stuff, sufficient for us to have the capital to reconstruct the Scottish economy. But we need a national organisation that goes out and tells folk that. How do you go into the housing schemes at the moment and say, I want you to be led with John Swinney? It's not going to work. But if you go into the housing schemes and you say, you're worried about currency, there's the answer. And by the way, you'll not have a parliament that can tell you what to do. You'll be able to tell the parliament, you can't do this, because that's the constitution. Here are the 3 priorities. Education, building houses for the people, reconstructing the National Health Service. That's what we're going to do. If we had a national organisation that brought the Commonweal in, but the currency group in, there's another group working on the economy. Everybody's working. Nobody knows what they're doing. But by saying nobody, I mean the general public. And we've got to make a whole number of people in Scotland re-belief in their ability. That's what happened in 2014. It was a national teach-in. And you watched the self-confidence rise day by day, month by month. We started with 29% and ended with 45%. That was a remarkable thing that we managed to do. But that was because people had a self-belief that the most deprived housing schemes come out 90% on polling day. That's what we've got to reorganise. But that cannot be done unless we've got a national organisation. That's the challenge before us now.
We got time for a couple more questions, so go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jim. It's been wonderful. Martin, it's been great. It's been very informative.
Sorry, he's asking, you can be next.
Somebody,
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I totally agree with what both of you said, and you talked about we need a funded system to get all of these groups together, and you talked about an independent, non-government, as it were. The problem being that every penny that the Scottish Government tries to spend is criticised and decried and under investigation by the Unionists and Westminster. So we need to be able to have these institutions. Now, you know how to move in the corridors of power and you know who's got the money, can you talk with people and get one of these institutions set up? I'm not suggesting you set it up, but you must know where to go to get all of this, because it's vital in our preparation.
Well,
So between yourself and others in your sphere, can you do that?
bear in mind that we don't have a huge number of very well-off people who are committed to independence or would do so publicly. So it's a matter of sometimes doing it backdoor. At the moment, there's a group talking to people with money, hoping to persuade them. Well, a lot of people won't come out in public, but we know who we want to talk to, and there's a group of people, I can tell you, I am not involved in the group, because for one of them I'm persona non grata, so that's the sensible thing, is not to get involved. They are going to talk to people with money on the basis that we need a national organisation and we need to do fundamental work that is required, and we've got to commission that work. So that's actually happening. And if it was successful in getting the initial seed money, we can then go out to crowdfunding, to the general movement, because you're then credible. We've actually got this, we can do this, we can do it better if you bring in more cash.
Please.
No, I was only going to say back to the lady there who was talking about setting things up and who was doing this and that. There are a lot of people like me who are retired, quite willing to give my expertise if you're starting to set up groups of people to take each portion of this problem, explain it, define it, and then look for people that were happy to build, to do it, not paid, just to do it for the country. I would do it. I'm a retired accountant.
This is where the national organisation is important, because you get nowhere to volunteer at the moment.
Okay. We got time for time for one more question.
No, the lady at the camera's been having a hand up for a long time.
Go ahead. Excuse me. I didn't see.
May I ask? Well, it's not really to ask a question, it's just a comment, if you don't mind. Because I'm only a woman. You mentioned something about persuading people. And I just wanted to, I've got such a loud voice, come on.
Not on the other end of the internet.
Okay, I just wanted to mention something. If you look at all the colonies in the world, okay, they all suffered from settler colonization. Now, Professor Alfberg has literally gone in and done research, and in his book he talks about settler colonization. Now, there's an international statute against it. And it's like in America, you can't get the Native American Indians having to persuade the colonial settlers, can we have our land back? Because it doesn't work. And in Scotland, there are certain people, and maybe people who voted no in the referendum, or they suddenly decided, hang on, that was actually a really bad idea, But they can actually say, we're going to persuade you, because those people cannot be persuaded. They are hostile colonial settlers, and it's a criminal thing. It's a crime. So I just wanted to mention that. Obviously, you've got your opinions, and everyone's got theirs, and you're looking at it from a certain angle. I just wanted to mention that. And there was something else, but I've got to mention, so I forgot what it is. Lucky for everyone.
I wholly believe in the art of persuasion. I'm a politician. I'm not an academic. I'm a politician with 60-odd years' experience. And persuasion works if you approach people in the right way. If you go up to somebody and say, see, you're a traitorous bastard, well, he's not going to listen to you. But if you say to somebody, look, I've got very close friends who vote no. I've got Tory friends. I've got no problem sitting down with them and arguing and debating. And the reason that they're happy to listen to me is that I recognise that they have a legitimate position. Being unionist is a legitimate position. We have to win them off that position. I went to London as a Labour MP, a unionist. And I was a firm unit. I was known as the hammer of the nationalists. I gave them no quarter whatsoever. And it was a slow burn for me. And, and what I'm trying to say to folk is, please understand the unionists. They invested a great deal of their emotional capital in something they believed in. My stepdaughter told me last night about a row that took place in the back gardens of where her small flats are. The row was about independence. Two women said, we're beginning to revolt, to say we're sorry, we voted no. And one of the guys voted yes, got stuck into them. You're stupid this and you're stupid that. And my stepdaughter said you could see the mind closing. They're open to persuasion because the circumstances are. You go out and talk to folk, nobody believes the UK works. It's broke and broken are the number of times you hear folk say. Say, go and read The Spectator this week. It's all in an article, it's in their leader, and it's in a major article of what has gone wrong south of the border. And we realise that. We're poor because we're part of a poor society. So we're no problem trying to persuade people. And if you persuade them, you've got them. That's the key. And believe it, I'm sorry to sound this way, but look, the only people that are going to matter are the unionist vote. Without a section of them, we cannot win. That's the fact. And that's the fact we've got to deal with.
Elliot wants to make a brief point, and then we'll have one final question. So go ahead, Elliot.
Okay, so I absolutely agree with that about you've got to persuade. One of the things that has made the debate in Wales a little bit different from the debate in Scotland is that there has been perhaps a greater decoupling in Wales of the governance question from the identity question. One of the consequences of the 2014 process was that there was a bit of shifting and sorting going on, where people's position on the question of whether Scotland should be an independent country came to be very closely tied to whether they felt themselves to be mostly Scottish or mostly British. A Scottish identity was maintained for 300 years within a British state and a British imperial state. I think part of the question of how we get a majority for independence is how do we let people who have a British identity continue to have a British identity within a Scottish state? And that, because then it takes the emotiveness away, and it enables then a pragmatic decision to be made about, well, how well are you governed? And if we can decouple those two things, that might help. And the other thing about, when people who voted no last time shift their position. Does anyone remember that story about a guy who hired workers for a vineyard, and some were hired at the first hour, and some were hired at the last hour? Yeah? And you can't say that, if you were hired at the first hour, you can't then go to those that were hired at the last hour and say this isn't fair. I don't want to sort of over-sacralize this. But I think there is a thing there. People come to realizations about things at different times.
Thank you, Elliot. We have time for one more question, so please.
Hello, my name is Neil Tye. I live on the Black Isle, and my expertise has been 50 years in the oil industry as a surveyor and engineer. My recent expertise is macroeconomics, and what I listened to here, I listened to Tim today, and I listened to him before. He's the expert on currency for you, Jim. There's a lot to learn for everybody about macroeconomics. Yeah. There is an immense amount of ignorance about it. And the sooner people like yourselves get to grips with a group that starts education on macroeconomics, the whole world about Scotland and the way it can finance itself will become crystal clear. I wrote a number of articles with the late Ian Lawson's blog, Yours to Scotland. I wrote about 7 or 8 papers on economics, and they were regarded as being quite good. I enjoyed writing them. I still do. And I'm writing a book now about black gold.
Yep.
And I know exactly the fundamental finances, what the British government has done to the Scottish government since 1970. It's disgusting. I can actually tell you here that the HM Treasury have never, ever agreed to disclose exactly how much money they've paid the Scottish government for revenues from oil. It's been hidden deliberately. And I would like to think that people like Tim, yourselves, and other people, we are not ignorant. We understand, and there are good people who want to do good things for Scotland.
So I'd like to give both of you an opportunity to respond and give a final word to our gracious crowd. So if you want to start, Jim.
I begin to wonder whether the Scots are the softest in the world family. We are sitting with oil and gas. One of the things that I found people don't understand, the oil and gas for a 60 million population is not the same as oil and gas for a 5 million population. You know, and it's the 5 million population that we are with that resource. It is, I don't think we can nationalise the North Sea because we don't have the expertise. You can nationalise a shipyard because we know about shipbuilding. We could have nationalised the steel industry because we know about that. We actually don't know very much about the North Sea as a population. I mean, I was at a meeting and a guy said, we'll nationalise the oil industry. I said, how many rigs are in the North Sea? Oh, about 30, he says.
14 billion barrels of oil
That's right.
still to extract
Yes.
right now.
And you know, we should go out now and tell people, remember the 214 lie from Sir Ian Wood. There's only 20 years left. It's more like a puddle than a reservoir. We've got to be able to explain to the Scots that we are sitting on a fortune, even if we're talking about sharing it with the current oil companies. And you know, I'm a politician, I'm not a macroeconomic economist. But if we're going to reconstruct the Scottish economy from what it is at the moment, capital is going to be required. And that black stuff is capital.
I will tell you how it's extracted from the Treasury, and I'll discuss it with you later.
Okay.
5 minutes.
We'll allow Elliot to get the last word before the end of our meeting.
So there's so much here that I would want to summarise, but the line that comes to me is from a John Betjeman poem, where he talks about democracy and proper drains. And I go back to my sewers thing about how, you know, these things are under the ground, but actually the quality of the state by which you are governed makes a difference to your quality of life.
Yeah.
Right? And the underlying claim of the Scottish independence movement is that we can build a Scottish state which is better at serving the public interest than the British state has been able to do. That requires its constitutional foundations, the quality of the democracy that we have will influence then the quality of the development that we get. And I spend a lot of time in different parts of the world, you know, most recently actually in the Caribbean. Tough life, someone's got to do it. But all of those countries, they talk about development. And when you raise this point about macroeconomics, it seems to me that in many ways, perhaps the legacy of Scotland's historical position is that this is actually an underdeveloped country.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of where we are in relation to the potential. Right? And getting the right kind of state with the right kind of constitutional foundation seems to me to be really critical in bridging that gap and getting to where we need to be. Thank you.
So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much, Elliot and Jim, for participating, and it's been most illuminating, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session starts about 4:30, but will be finished by 6. The bar opens in half an hour, and we're going to be reviewing the front pages of a number of newspapers. So if you've got any input in what the news should be, stick around.
Do I give it back to you?
Well, we keep going. I'm getting old, unfortunately.
I've got something that I've been trying to talk to.
Right.
Thank you so much.
No,
Thank you so
it's a
much.
pleasure.
Honestly, you opened my eyes today, and I'm so proud to
I've
be
got something
part
I've
of
been
it.
trying to talk to. I'm not a speaker, right? That's why I didn't say anything. I made it worse to camera. I've been talking to the Yes Movement. It's the biggest movement we have.
That's
It's
right.
the Yes Movement. And I've put a proposal forward to 3 Yes groups that we find a leader for the grassroots movement. And they all agreed that that's what we should do. I had a letter to send, and obviously the Yes group that I was in, I kind of fell out with them. So it kind of fell apart. But if you get any ideas on how, because my idea was that we would try and bring the Yes movement together.
Let me shake your hand.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, I
And
agree with you.
vote and get them to nominate
Yeah,
their candidates
yeah,
and break it down like a proper election and end up with a figurehead. Somebody that can speak to the media, somebody that can control.
Well, there are moves afoot at the moment. My problem is I'm running out of energy.
Right,
Yeah.
me too.
But there are moves afoot. I talked to some of the people in the Yes Movement as well, because in my view, they are the basis of a national organisation. They're all there, but not knitted together.
Get your microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
No, it's
Good idea.
otherwise we can all hear all your. In MI5, I've got the cars outside for you.
In the country.
Two men.
Two men, unless they self-identify as
Well, you never
women,
know.
you know.
You never
I don't know
know.
what you want to do with it. Well, stick that at the side, yeah.
No, that's fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it wouldn't fall back. I'm on. That's cool. Don't tell anybody. Well, you never know. He was here. He done a session this morning.
It was like half an hour before that, then I wanted to ask questions and think that I even remembered one of the questions was distribution.
Well, there's lots of ISP pens on the stall.
They've got to take them off the stickers, but all with the ISP logo on it, you know, I want to do it. Can you keep an eye on the camera?
I don't think anybody will run away with it, but it's fine. Just leave it.
It's just over there.
That's fine. Right, away you go. There's pens and that there in the stall. I am. My political career's over. Well, what can I say? It's just a fabulous formula, isn't it? So easy for the voters. It's be that generous. That's true.
So my plan was, Neil's not here.
All right.
Say he's coming back, but I've got Craig who was going to leave early. I think he's going to stay in Basel.
All right, okay.
So all we're going to do is look at what are on the front pages as the main stories, discuss those, chance water to keep up, playing bonuses out to see building.
Yeah.
UK economy price pessimism to grow north 0.7%
What's it?
first quarter, nearly 1%.
Nearly?
We're rich.
No, we're not. Stop telling fibs, David. David, stop telling fibs. Stop telling fibs.
What?
About being rich and...
We're going to be rich, I tell you.
Rich? No, no, I'm fine. Yep. No, no, not at all. It's okay, I've been provided water and things, so we're all good. Yeah. Did you get your pen and that from the stall?
I've got a sticker.
Right. Have you not got an ISP pen? Oh. Are you here tomorrow? All right, it's the same with me. Good. What, that? Nothing chaotic to say. No, but what people don't know is it's actually got the saltire there in the middle. You know, but a lot of people just see the. Yeah. But a lot of people don't notice. If no signs up, I think you might be on the stage here to give your opinion, please.
No, you don't want my That's how we settle it. Let's get the youth in one blue bonnets. Let's get an army man. We call it force because we take that as an act of aggression.
Absolutely. Can't have that.
Volunteer force, we call it voluntary army. I like what Lewis has done. I don't know if you know Lewis, but this EPR.
Yes, I know him very well. No. Yeah. Really? No. No, Lewis is nice. Well, it was me that said to David Henry, like, if you got independence, he went, no, I goes, right, I'll get Jem. And I'd said to Lewis as well, because Lewis hadn't been invited, so it was me that actually invited him to come here as well. So I was like, right, David, if you, and he's like, no, and it was right, here's his details, contact him, because he'll come and do some, because he interviewed me, he knows me, he interviewed me last year at when we were here for the currency conference, and because he knows me for the Kieran from years ago, so he came and interviewed me last year here, and it was me that said, are you coming a lot when we were at the rally 2 weeks ago? I goes, are you going to the SSRG? And he goes, don't know anything about it. And I said to David, he goes, I had his card, I was like, contact Luke because he's really nice, he might do some filming that way. He's a nice guy. Yeah, oh yeah. It'd be quite good then if you could maybe even work with him and things like that. No, he is definitely. He's a nice guy. But no, it'd be quite good if you could even work with him. Peter Gill that does the Scotland channel. Yeah.
He's asked me not to go Scottish Investment Street, not from this one. But just see. But he's asked me not to come on it, but then he's asked me to come on it. And then the RIC, which is radical.
Right. Yeah.
People were talking about to take over a building and this is dodgy stuff. Why would you want to
exactly. We don't have to. No, exactly. No. No, no, I'm fine. I'm good. When are we starting? Is there anybody here? About, I mean, for speakers here? Is it just me and you? I've said Jason can go up and speak. Aye. Yeah. You'll be fine for just now, I think.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See, this works. There's nothing wrong with the desk. It's the bloody annoying little... Right, so that's fine. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. Cool. That's us. So we're all right with that. Right. Your job.
Okay, I go around and get the...
Now, first of all, when we decide to go on, all you do is do this.
Got it. Okay, got it.
And that's now the camera.
Okay.
Okay? So, I'm all right. I do need a chair. So, I wonder if we'll move around a bit.
Do you want another one like that, or?
No, I'm just going to sit at this end, I think. Because, so if I sit at this end, the others are all on radio mic.
Should I take one of these an extra radio mic that I can roam around?
Who's sitting in that chair? You want me over there? Yes. Right, hold on a wee second. Okay. I thought you were going to go to Cannes and do your Tom Cruise impersonation. Is Neil here? Right. Okay. You're here. Are you holding up the bar, are you?
No, I wasn't.
Oh yes, you were. Go on, tell the truth.
I live 2 minutes on the road.
Okay.
How are you? You.
All right, sorry, I told him to.
Hi, Neil.
And there's the lady that survived next to the man that survived. Where was it?
Lebanon.
Remember, you are deputy leader of the police department. Did he swear? Didn't swear this morning. That was.
No, you don't.
That was Tommy.
And you two are the leader of a police. Remember that?
Uh-huh.
Are we close to your home here, Neil?
Yes, 2 minutes. I've nipped home for lunch and then ended up chatting with the boys. They were out on the town last night, so get all the updates.
Right, stop.
Well, I don't know if that's mine or not, so I'll take that one.
Great.
Yeah, there's fresh water there anyway.
All right.
No,
There's water there.
bad. It's bad. I've got a whiskey. I don't need water.
Gosh, it's a long time since I've looked at the Guardian.
Oh, here comes trouble again.
And I just don't know what else can be done. to put pressure. It's apparently they won't admit it's a genocide because then they have to act.
No, good.
No, fine, David. Yep. Go on.
All would be reprehensible. I think, I really think that London is in serious
It's not that much,
He
it's not
knows
in the
it.
print edition anyway.
Well, it's not the online edition, because our story was in it. Did you see it?
That's
Yes.
Yeah, that was amazing. How did you manage that?
I did that, yeah. I gave her our words. I did send them to her and see what she thinks.
I was really surprised.
She said, "Oh, just use that, thanks. That's an easy job."
I was really surprised at that.
It said easy.
And I guess the thing is, in these days of copy and paste journalism, nobody actually read it. They were just copying and pasting.
They just look on Twitter and online and just copy and paste everything.
Oh, what a nerve that Patsy Carvey.
Oh, what are you moaning at now, Neil? What are you moaning at?
Oh, he's saying that politicians betray the LGBT community. But it's him
Well, if you think of
betray
it,
the
let me know.
LGBT
You're good at
community.
thinking out of the box. So.
Nasty, nasty wee rascal. Horrible man.
You're just self-identifying now.
You got a Fiona Bruce wig.
No, he's just going to self-identify as Fiona Bruce, that's
Oh.
all. So.
I've got a big blonde.
Pardon me?
I've got a big blonde wig, like a dress-up thing, that I got for a staff Halloween thing.
Right.
And it's like a Bee, you know the Bee Gees,
Now,
big
are you sure about that?
blonde
Neil?
hair.
Are you sure about this?
Oh, I'm
Are you
absolutely
positive?
And so my staff named it, I can't remember now.
I'm planning not to say anything at all, Neil. I'm just going to sit here.
Just here for the beer. Are you on the beer?
Hopefully fall asleep.
Oh, right. Well, I haven't seen the email. Thank you.
Dave, 1 2 1 2. Cool.
Did you say that was Jura?
No, jurors.
Oh, Jura.
Ask them, I don't think they do. They might not drink. Thank you.
One of my marriages was on the Isle of Jura.
1 2 1 2. Okay, cool.
How long did it last? How long did it last?
7 years.
That's not bad.
No.
That's as long as it takes a bottle of Jura to mature.
7 minutes and counting. See, I'm the one cabled in, so I'm the only one that gets electrocuted if it all goes wrong. You're all right. There we go.
So if we throw water over you, you're knackered?
Yeah, don't. The Union Jack's not waterproof. Yeah. We're going to start exactly at 5 o'clock and finish exactly at 6.
Going to hold you to that now.
And we're going to pretend we know what we're talking about. And do you know I've got wigs at home?
You're obsessed with these
These
wigs.
wigs,
I'm getting
they're all nylon though, they're highly flammable.
Plus you're all cabled up. That could be a really...
Yeah, like a Roman candle.
It could be, huh?
Yeah, so let's see, what do we think? home record. The Times. Talk. Are these questions, are they? You might need to translate. Joined up right, I'm not good with joined up right.
Issue sorted.
No, I'm still looking on it, but it's okay. I'm sure it'll get sorted.
I've got a question for you. You.
What is it?
Something you know a lot about.
Discourse has got more violence, unpleasant, and more tense around, or whether people are just more sensitive to it. Give it to us. Sorry, say that again? I'm not sure whether discourse has got more violent and unpleasant, or whether people are just more sensitive to it, or it's a combination of the two.
I think it's a combination. I think people get offended and outraged more easily. And there's a lot of polarising emotional events. And so it's a lot easier to say we hate them rather than we disagree with them. You know, because the Gen Z snowflake mentality.
Of Glasgow. I don't expect people to say things like that about me. Well, that sort of goes with the top.
It does. You don't what happens in politics. Exactly. You cease to be a person. Yeah. You know, you're public. Yeah. You're a public figure, you're public property.
But you don't have to become Lord Provost of Glasgow.
No, you no.
Oh, I see.
Basically, you knew what you were in for.
That's fantastic news. Right. Okay. We're getting feedback a little
on me. Well, they're not going to follow through on. I mean, I've been threatened with murder multiple times, and it's not happened yet.
No.
Let me just check the audio levels. Can we just get start with Colette and go around and say, hello, my name is Colette.
Hello, my name is Colette Walker.
My name is Neil Hanvey.
My name is Craig Manning.
And I'm Yvonne Ridley.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes?
That was a mic test.
2 minutes and counting. Yeah. Oh yeah, I liked that one, didn't I? One of the papers has got a story about
the water
the
islands.
Brits. Yeah, one of them's got the British GDP has shot up by 0.7%.
It's fantastic.
Wow. Now, isn't that almost in the margin of error? So it might actually be zero.
I think they measure these economic things to finite detail, and that's probably quite a lot. Because if it's almost 1%, that's okay. Quite a lot.
Right. Okay, Mark, we're ready to go in 1 minute, I think. Okay. So just 5 o'clock. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is evening, just about. We are still here in beautiful sunny Dunfermline. And although Scotland doesn't have its own genuine broadcaster yet, we thought we'd go through the process of what it would be like to have a political programme with a panel on it that actually has knowledge and experience. Now, it's quite unscripted because we've decided to focus on what's made the news in 4 major selling newspapers. So we're being guided what some of their stories are today. If you want to join in, please do. Some of you have already given us some questions. Some of them are most interesting, so we'll get to them as soon as possible. Once we've gone round at the first subject, we will open it up to questions from you, the audience. So be prepared. Right. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panel. Our panel is on my left, and quite left, is Colette Walker, who is the leader of the ISP party, followed by Neil Hanby, who is the deputy leader of the ALBA party. Poor Craig is not the leader of a party, not yet, but he has been a British ambassador, I understand, and is a major campaigner on peace, especially in the Middle East. And finally, on my left, is Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne Ridley is both an author and a journalist, and of course is still a member of the ALBA party, I believe, and also stood in the last general election in Newcastle Central and North, or North Central?
Central and West.
Central and West. I was nearly right. And she got a remarkable 7% as an independent candidate, which is not to be sniffed at. So I thought the first question I was going to ask, in broad subjects, what's our panel's view on Donald Trump? Colette?
I can't say what I really want to say. Donald Trump was voted in by the US voters. I think that they should have done a wee bit more research to his first time in office. And I think now that they're actually regretting what is actually happening within their country. So I think, again, like everybody, when you're standing for an election, I think everybody, the voters, should be doing more research to what people are saying. You just don't take everything at face value. And I think they're learning their lessons now. So just beware of what you wish for. They wanted change, but I don't think it was necessarily the change that they've received. So, and the poor are possibly going to be getting poorer, and I don't think he's a man to be trusted.
We'll move our way logically along our front panel. So.
Okay, well, I'll try and do a step back assessment of Donald Trump rather than my personal view, which is probably in step with the majority of people. So as an individual, you know, there is a lot to dislike, but also if you're being dispassionate about it, you know, I can see how someone who has quoted the media throughout his life, so this man has been in the spotlight in America since he was a youngster, a teenager, and as a man in his 20s. And so there's a certain cachet about him that I think a lot of people in America see that perhaps we don't. But I think the phenomenon of him coming back into power really says more about the state of the Democratic Party than it does necessarily about him and some of the policy choices and weaknesses in their ability to deliver under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris than it does necessarily about, you know, reverential support for Mr. Trump. And I think there's a lesson there for all of us, and we're seeing that lesson play out in the UK by a Labour administration that have completely lost any connection with Labour values, or what I understand to be traditional Labour values, and a Tory party that probably are as confused about their politics, and that has allowed our version of Mr Trump, Nigel Farage, who has been on the media for however many years and promoted by the BBC over that period of time when he had no real reason for that. And so I think there's a trend that's happening across the globe where people who call themselves progressive, who are anything but, they're actually quite authoritarian in their positions, have discredited politics because of some of their positions, and that has given legitimacy to voices on the right. Now, you know, there are moderate people in Scotland who heaved a sigh of relief with some of the policy choices that Donald Trump took in his first few days, particularly around women and girls' rights. But then there is the flip side to that, which is it's hard to believe that Donald Trump is the proponent of women's and girls' rights. However, you know, the door was open, he chose that policy and ran with it, and that's exactly what's happening with reform. You know, reform were nowhere when the women's rights were being challenged by people like Colette and others in the early days of all of this madness. But they have now grabbed that mantle and have made it look like it's their own, but it's not. So I can understand why he is where he is.
And for Craig, what's your thoughts on Donald Trump and the effect that he's having on our global politics?
I have a first thought which occurs to me is that we're not independent yet, so we don't yet know what our citizenship rules will be when we are independent. But under what I imagine is likely to be our citizenship rules, Donald Trump would be entitled to a Scottish passport, because his mother was a Scot born in Scotland, and he's half Scottish. And I think it's perhaps worth remembering that when we talk of him as though he were an alien from another planet, that actually he's 50% Scottish. Which
something I think we can all be very proud of.
Which is, so to some extent, at least, when I studied psychology at university a bit for a year or two, many years ago, there was always a great debate over the extent to which behaviour is governed by environmental factors and the extent to which it's governed by genetic factors. Insofar as it is governed by genetic factors, we are responsible for Donald Trump. There's a thought. More seriously, I think, to me, it's much more interesting than the things he's changed is the extent to which he actually represents continuity. And behind an awful lot of the sound and fury, there's a continuity of policy. Joe Biden was at least as complicit in the genocide in Gaza as Trump. Mm-hmm. You know, nothing's actually really changed except being more blatant about it, possibly. And if you look at what's happened with Ukraine, for example, although the language is different, the actual real difference in American policy, they haven't completely cut off arms supply to Ukraine. They certainly haven't stopped the supply of money to Ukraine. There's no fundamental change, and often I'm, because of my background, foreign policy is what interests me. The tariffs are a change, bringing in a tariff regime to try to restore something of the US trade balance. But again, we've all seen that came in with a huge thump and then was almost immediately reversed and stopped. And so you have changes which remain, but they're like 10% changes, not 80% or 240%. And we don't yet know where that's going to end up. But and again, on immigration policy and deportations and that kind of thing, yes, there is a change, but it's much more a change of rhetoric than it is really a change of approach. Possibly a change of scale to some extent, but there's no fundamental difference to what Biden was doing. Now we see something of that in the UK, where we've had a change of government here, apparently, and absolutely bugger all difference between Tory policies and Labour policies. Keir Starmer's changed nothing, and in fact he's coming out with rhetoric on immigration that the Tories would be ashamed of. So I think very often you have to look behind the show and behind the shock to essentially the continuing neoliberal, the continuing imperialist, and the continuing ultra-capitalist policies. We've seen throughout the Western world, we have seen the gap between ordinary people and the super wealthy grow larger and larger and larger, whoever is in power. It was true under Biden, it was true under Trump. So I don't think we should be carried away by Trump's own style and publicity into believing this is a fundamental break or change in America. It's not. It's just a brasher version of the same thing.
Craig, you've done a lot on the Middle East. I watched some of your reports from Lebanon, which I thought was extremely brave and was concerned for your safety. But this also brings me on to Yvonne. Yvonne Ridley, you've been to Gaza and you've been to the Middle East many, many times. What's your take on how do we secure a peace, and what would Scotland's role be as an independent country in the future? Do you think Scotland could be a positive influence on bringing peace to parts of the world?
I think an independent Scotland could certainly play a role of influence, because the country has a fantastic reputation abroad. Wherever I go, I make a point when I hand over my British passport of saying I'm from Scotland, and I do have a Scottish cover over the passport so people can see that, and it does make a difference, because whenever you are at a security point or they say where are you from and you say Scotland, there's automatically a smile on someone's face, and that's because the diaspora out there has made such a positive influence on people's lives. I was in Sri Lanka last year, and Scotland played a very significant role in the tea industry. There's a Scots guy who's revered in Sri Lanka for introducing tea into Sri Lanka after they suffered a coffee blight, because coffee was the main drink in that country at the time. And everywhere you go, there is a positive influence, whether it's medical, whether it's banking, wherever you go. And so I do think that an independent Scotland would have influence. Now people might say, oh, but there's only 5 million people living here. Well, I would say look at Qatar in the Middle East. Qatar has become a major power in especially in the Middle East, and it has probably 500,000 people who live there. Lots of overseas workers, but there's about 500,000 Qataris, and they are hugely influential. Of course, a lot of it has to do with gas and oil money, but I mean,
but hasn't that
Scotland
become a huge
could
burden?
also.
Isn't that a huge burden for them? I mean, we're told in Scotland our oil and gas is running out. In fact, already run out, I think.
I have never known oil and gas to be a curse other than in Scotland. I've never, whenever they talk about the Saudi oil fields, nobody ever turns around to the Crown Prince and goes, it's running out. Scotland is continually reminded or undermined by Westminster your gas and oil isn't forever, it's running out. And of course, at the rate they're stealing everything from this country, it will eventually run out.
So, I wanted to bring us back, it's been touched on already, a couple of things. The Supreme Court ruling, a number of us supported this case, the women going to the Supreme Court to find out legally what a woman is, which most of us already knew that. But I wonder if this is a sign that women have become more than equal, that they are, they seem to be not only getting more support, but also clarifying the law. And I'm just wondering why there isn't similar support coming from large quantities of men. And me and Neil were both down at the Scottish Parliament. I was there when that legislation for the GRR bill was passed. And I was one of the few men down supporting the women's protest in 2021 outside the Scottish Parliament. And it always struck me, why is there so few men here? Do you think now that we've got legal clarity, thanks to a Scottish group of women that raised over £200,000 to go to the Supreme Court to get this legal clarity, do you think we're now going to see more men pay attention to women's equality?
I hope so. I've always said that women can't progress without help from men. Now, some women might find that anathema, others might say nonsense, but our greatest allies are our men, and we have some great pro-women voices who are men in the Alba Party, Neil being one. And when I was women's convener, and I know it was disastrous, or it had a disastrous end, but when I was women's convener, I wanted to see men play more of a role in the women's conferences. And I think it was short-sighted to have to airbrush men out of the scene, because at the end of the day, you know, women, as I often say, are half the world, and we gave birth to the other half. So, you know, men are going to be ever present, and to try and airbrush them from women's rights is crazy. We're losing a great deal of support.
And I'm going to come to Neil. Nicola Sturgeon, being the first female First Minister of Scotland, and in that position for many, many years, do you think she has done womanhood proud, or do you think she will be remembered for damaging women's issues?
Well, she'll certainly be remembered by some women for that very reason, and she will probably receive contempt because of it from many others. I think, look, whether you believe in the self-ID proposals or not, there is a way to conduct yourself in politics, and that requires that however you disagree with your opponent's position, it's always appropriate to engage in the debate in good humour, you know, on most things. Her refusal to engage with the debate, I think, undermined the post of First Minister, first of all, because you don't occupy a high office for your personal objectives, although that's tempting when you've got power, or may be tempting. You're there as a custodian of the interests of the whole of the country. It's a really important position in that regard, and therefore you have to had the internal rigour to be able to have the self-awareness of what your personal preference is, but the ability to consider the impacts of those views on others. And failure to do that really leads to despotism. And, and I think that, it's not unfair to say that there are some women that I've spoken to who take that view of Nicola, and I have my own personal story about the way that I was targeted under her direction on a number of occasions because I refused to be silent about child safeguarding and also the protection of women's and other sex-based rights. So I think Nicola is probably, correct me, I have a different view, it's probably less about the issue and more about the approach. I think the issue became the problem because the approach was wrong, because there was no genuine attempt to engage and there was no genuine attempt to listen. In fact, the opposite was true. Women who had concerns were labelled as not, or their concerns were labelled as not valid. And so I think that's probably, and there's probably a range of different issues as well that have been lost in the noise, where a similar dogmatic approach from Nicola has damaged her reputation and certainly her legacy.
And Colette, I just wondered, as a woman coming into politics, do you think Nicola's Sturgeon's, if you like, high office is a help or a hindrance?
I think years ago, before I joined the SNP, I made sure that I was non-partisan. I just wanted to look at all the different parties. To have Nicola Sturgeon at that time becoming First Minister, I think it seemed to be a good thing. Again, I'm classed as a disabled woman. I can't stand that terminology. I don't like anything that begins with DIS. It's very negative and it doesn't define me as a person. I get on with my life, but I'm classed as somebody that's came into politics as not only a woman but a disabled woman, which is even harder. When I first joined the SNP, I thought it was because they stood for equality and human rights, etc., everything that I stand for and that I've been campaigning for many, many years, because I've got a disabled son as well. And it was also that we did have a female First Minister, and that gave me a bit of hope that women could actually come into politics and not constantly be seen either the House of Commons or Holyrood PMQs or FMQs, and it was mainly men. There wasn't that representation, but there's also not the representation of disabled people. So I had a bit of encouragement there, and sadly, not long after I started, I realised there was almost an agenda, and obviously the lobbyist groups were doing a very, very good job. And instead of the issues that we knew what the SNP stood for, it was for independence. That's why everybody, I thought, was joining the SNP or was a member, and that's what I wanted to be part of. The GRRB, the self-identification, that basically took over, and then there was less and less talk about our liberation, our independence. It became the main topic, but as Neil said, we were campaigning for it for many years before even the media picked up on it. You would get the occasional right-wing media like Talk TV, etc., that would bring it up, but it wasn't here in Scotland. We were out campaigning all the time. We were putting our heads above the parapet. We were even outside Pullman Prison. Was there any media? No. It was only latterly that our Scottish media, so-called Scottish media, actually picked up on it. I think, sadly, with the way it went, Nicola hasn't done any favours for females wanting to come into politics. But I'm hoping
that now that they've seen women, such as for Women's Scot and Women Won't Waste, etc., and for the likes of myself and others, Eva Comrie, etc., who put our heads above the parapet, they see that we fought the fight and we were right, we were the right side of history, they won the case, and I'm hoping that that gives more females that incentive, especially for next year, to actually come and stand, because their voices actually have been heard now.
Yeah.
So get involved in politics, because you can only make a difference if you actually get involved and speak up and speak out.
And going over to Craig, but maybe change the subject a little. There's legislation both in Scotland and in Westminster Parliament proposing an assisted dying bill. And I wondered, one, what our panel actually thinks of this legislation, and whether or not for a parliament like in Scotland that has made what would appear to be such bad decisions on legislation, such as the GRR bill that was rushed through. I wondered what the panel's thought, and I'll start with you, Craig, on the issue of legislating to assist people to die.
I just want to say one sentence about Nicola Sturgeon before we get on to that, which is to say that I think Nicola Sturgeon happens to be a very, very vicious, nasty and vindictive human being. And it's nothing to do with whether she's male or female. She's just a very unpleasant person. So a difficult example to pick. On assisted dying, thank you. I think...
Now, Nicola, please stop.
I think on assisted dying, this is one of those subjects where perfectly decent people can have opposing views. You know, they're perfectly nice, genuine people on both sides of the debate. My own view is that I don't want the state to have anything at all to do with any decisions on who lives and who dies in any circumstances. So personally, I am strongly against it. I also think it's one of those areas where sometimes a certain greyness is not unhelpful. And if I think of my own elderly relatives who have passed on, I'm quite sure that there came a stage where pain relief passed the state where the medical staff were aware they gave them that much pain relief, it was going to ease them away. And that's not spoken. And I don't know how it works in terms of NHS protocols, but it seems to me to work rather well in practice, because we all come to the end of life and we all die, and none of us want to die painfully. And I think once you start formalizing essentially euthanasia, because that's what assisted dying is, it becomes very, very difficult. I think circumstances where there is something, unspoken that happens in the room where people die, between relatives and medical staff and whatever, in terms of keeping them as comfortable as possible. Most people who die, seems my own experience, one thing which is really unpleasant is that at some stage they seem to withdraw intravenous support, and then people die of thirst, and that seems to be the way most people actually go eventually, as far as I can see. These are very, very difficult questions, but I don't like at all the idea of formalized assisted dying. And when you combine that with what we have at the moment, which is a particular state narrative about the cost of disabled people and who is not economically active, the whole thing becomes deeply potentially sinister. Mm-hmm. So my own and I think it's better for the law to err on the chance of safety. so that if there's any suspicion that anybody has been killed unlawfully, they should be prosecuted. You know, so my own feeling, I apologize for that rather rambling conclusion, but my own feeling is that the law should not be changed, that the law is corrected.
I want to go on to, or come back to this side, I want to go to Yvonne, and I wondered what your thoughts were, considering that the Scottish Parliament has already voted for this piece of first legislation, and that the majority of the MSP have voted in favour of it, and only 50-something were against it. And it makes you wonder who they're representing, because do you think there's been enough public debate on this issue? And also, is there a religious aspect to this that should be considered as well?
Well, it was an election issue in Newcastle, and by quite a large number of people, and I went and visited the ones who wrote to me and said that they wanted my support for assisted dying. I'm a Muslim, and it's against my faith, as it is, I believe, for Christians and Jews as well. Maybe other faiths, I don't know, but I wanted to be able to speak to people to find out why they were for assisted dying, and without exception, everyone had a horrific personal traumatic experience of a loved one who had died so unnecessarily in pain. And I started to come away thinking, you know, maybe they do have a point, maybe it's something that I should look at. But then, talking to other people who were against it, one of the main issues was the gap between rich and poor ever widening. And there were families who spoke to me who were concerned about the amount of money that was being drained from what they saw as their money from their parents' estates, being spent on care homes. And this was a huge issue as well, and I began to realise that whether we like it or not, there will be old people who feel as though I'm a burden on my family. And they may not say anything, or they could be pressurised, but people heading towards their end of life should not be made to feel pressurised into accelerating their end quickly to stop councils from getting their hands on the will or the estate of the person who's dying. Because, you know, more and more people are going into care homes. It's a huge problem that we need to be thinking about now, and how to tackle that. And quite frankly, having seen the way this Labour government has acted, shafting women pensioners, taking away cold weather payments, you know, and I'm thinking assisted dying, they would probably be campaigning next, offering free body bags and whatever other incentives that they could to bring about our demise. And so I'm with Craig. I wouldn't like to leave my future in the hands of the state.
Neil, somebody that's background was in the NHS, I believe.
Yep.
One of the things that struck me about a number of the speeches from the politicians that then voted in favour of assisted dying, to get it through its first reading, was many of them played and used emotional stories from relatives and people that had passed away and had a horrible, painful death. Do you think emotions should be used in any way when making a new law?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we can safely say that we know that's exactly what's been happening. But I just want to frame my comments. So I have had the great privilege and very difficult challenge of either assisting mainly young people. I worked with teenagers who had cancer, helping them plan their death, or being present when they passed away, and supporting the family and the like. So I've got a lot of skin in the game when it comes to this. And, you know, look, the reality is that you cannot make, however hard you try, you cannot make every death perfect. But you can certainly do everything you can to lessen the distress of the person who's dying and those around them. What you can't do is legislate because people have either witnessed a distressing death with the notion that somehow hastening that person's death with drugs is somehow better. It may be more precise because you can plan the exact time, but what you can't necessarily do is make it less distressing, because the loss of that person's life is the distressing factor. And so I find much of the reasoning difficult. I used to say that I was steadfastly ambivalent about the issue. But I'm certainly on the back of, I mean, my thinking had been shifting in this direction in recent years, but on the back of the Ledbetter bill, I am absolutely 100% opposed to it. And that's not just because of the tawdry way the bill has been introduced and the committee stage has progressed, but it's also, there are lessons from principally the Netherlands and Canada about how off-beam this type of legislation can go, and then bringing that swiftly into current debate in Scotland, and the points that I was making earlier today about the burden that older and disabled people are clearly tagged as by the government, that burdensome element is justification for assisted dying. And it's, bad enough with the, putting children at risk and women at risk when it comes to safeguarding. Have we completely lost our minds about safeguarding? I mean, the suggestion that there won't be another Harold Shipman by limiting the amount of people that a doctor can kill in a year is just for the birds. It's absolutely crazy. And I think the one piece of hope in Scotland is that although MacArthur's legislation has got past stage 1 and is going to committee, as I understand it, the chatter on the ground is that a lot of people, a lot of MSPs rather, supported the bill at stage 1 with the intention of voting it down when it came back at stage 3, because they don't believe that the current wording is going to be a viable piece of legislation, and already the Scottish GPs have said, we won't back this. We want the provision to not opt out, but you have to actually actively opt in before you can be considered to do this. But bottom line is, look, death is messy. It doesn't matter how you try and sanitize it, it's messy. And what we really need to do is not sanitize and medicalize killing. What we need to do is invest in palliative medicine, and so that people have access to expert protection.
And Colette, again, as a woman coming into politics, do you think that assisted dying has a place in our Scottish Parliament?
Not within the Scottish Parliament, no. If it's going to be anything, it would possibly have to be the people who speak and have a referendum. But I would agree with exactly what Neil said. You took the words out of my mouth about proper investment in palliative care. I think everybody, when a woman is pregnant, and they normally will discuss with their midwives a birthing plan, exactly how they want their child to come into this world. I think we do have the right to actually have a say and know that with confidence, and I mean with confidence, that when it comes to the end of life care, they know that they actually are going to get cared for in the way that they have suggested. And that's not talking about assisting dying, that's actually making sure that their death can be, and as you say, it's messy and it might not go to plan how it progresses and how fast it might progress. But if they know that there's actually a plan there for I don't want to get my words wrong, because this is a really contentious issue and it's a very important issue. But you want people to feel safe, secure. You don't want them to be in pain. You want to make sure that it's as painless death as possible. And it's not only for the person, it's for the family. Like, I know myself personally, and again, you were talking about in Parliament, people were given experiences or what they've heard from the constituents. But that's what putting legislation and policies is actually about in Parliament. So I can only go by things that I've experienced in my life when I'm looking at policies, etc. And, you know, with my own mother, who had a major stroke and basically took everything away from her, her speech, her swallow, she was paralysed, double incontinent. She survived that stroke for 9 months, and that was no quality of life as such. Thankfully, she did get the care that she needed and she required. But some people and families don't actually have the know-how or the confidence to speak up for the care that they should be actually given. So I think really, we really need to start looking at the proper investment in care, whether it's care homes, whether it's nursing, whether it's palliative care for end of life. But at this stage, where it is just now, I've not read the bill. I've been very busy doing, but I haven't read it in full, and that's the truth. What I would like to say is, as far as I know, they're talking about people that are terminally ill. I don't want people to start going off on a tangent about disabled people, the most vulnerable in society, because I don't think that's part of the bill at this stage. So I don't want the scaremongering. I don't want people getting the wrong context of it either. But I think for everybody, I think we really should have the security about good palliative care.
I think this comes back to, it is a very contentious issue, and it's the potential of unintended consequences which cannot be reversed. You know, you can't bring somebody back from having them assisted dead. That is the final decision, so you can't undo it. But this comes on to, I think, quite nicely, that we have another election coming up in Scotland next year, for anyone watching who doesn't know that, in 2026. How do you think the Scottish Parliament can rebuild its reputation? Because I think its reputation, many people would say, has been tarnished with failed bits of legislation such as the GRR bill. And even the assisted dying bill, if it was to pass in Scotland but not pass in Westminster, it would appear to be another constitutional crisis, because it would, of course, drive straight into another Section 35 being blocked. Because what if it was an English resident that was now living in Scotland who wanted to die or didn't want to die, and yet we've got one piece of legislation in Scotland saying they can be assisted. So it would appear that it's constitutionally not even been thought through, because it's trying to create a different law from what is happening in Westminster. But the Scottish election is next year. We've got representatives from 2 political parties here. So I wondered what you had hoped would be the result of next election. How is that going to help Scotland, and do you think it will help us move forward to independence? I'll start with you, Colette.
I think it's time. We've had the devolved parliament now for 26 years, and it'll be 27 years next year. So I would like to see a complete new parliament style. I'm not a fan of a one-party dominant parliament. I like the Danish style model, where you've got representation from lots of smaller parties and a diversity within the parliament, proper representation. I think it needs a clear out. We've just seen an article that John Swinney has now healed the SNP, and they're looking to now win the elections because he's healed the SNP party. So everything's fine now. We're okay. But seriously, I think we need new people in there. I think we need people that have actually shown that they are willing to stand up and speak out about and for Scotland and for the people of Scotland, and look to the future and how exactly what Scotland could look like and what Scotland could do, because I think there's no vision from the parliamentarians that are in our Holyrood Parliament right now. They're not giving people the vision of what an independent Scotland could look like. And I think people need to get in there who are actually going to speak up and speak out, and that's only going to happen is if people start paying attention to politics and they start going out campaigning and they actually go to the ballot box on the day of the election. There's no point staying at home. If you stay at home, basically you are not going to make any changes. If you want change, you have to be part of that change, and that part is you put the cross on a ballot paper. But also, if you don't make that change, we're going to either be stuck with the status quo that we have right now, and that can't be allowed to happen, because one, if things stay the way they are, after next year, we're not going to have a Scotland to fight for, because as Neil was saying earlier on in his event, and the work that I've been doing with the free ports, and our assets we're being asset stripped within an inch of our lives, and we're not going to have a Scotland to fight for. So this is the time that we need everybody to come together and go out and vote and get people in there that are actually going to fight for our country, because if you're not, you're going to end up getting a Reform Party in the constituency, because they're going to take splits and votes between the Union, the Tories and Labour. And then you're really going to have to worry about your NHS and the possibility of fracking, etc. in our country. So we need a clear out, but we need also we need the electorate to actually come out and actually vote and get new people in.
Over to Neil. What is your thoughts, and how do you think the next election can affect Scotland?
Well, it really comes down to the campaign, it comes down to the voting, and it comes down to the people who are elected, and the choice that we all have to make. I think the important thing to say is just to remind everyone that the current, in inverted commas, Scottish Parliament is a devolved Parliament of the United Kingdom. It's not Scottish other than it's located in Holyrood. So it effectively is an administrative arm of the UK state, and unless and until that changes, then I think how we construct our democracy in Scotland should be open for discussion about how second chambers or revising chambers should work, and indeed the form of administration and how we conduct ourselves. There's some interesting work on that in terms of historical arrangements, which I think are very interesting. However, for next year, the basic facts are this. So the SNP are sitting at around about 35%. They're projected to win the majority of constituency seats. So that I think will not change, because quite frankly, everybody else is so dreadful. And that is why the support has returned. However, on the list, they are currently polling at 25%. Now, for the SNP to win a list seat based on that performance in the constituency would require them to achieve around about 90% support on the list vote in that region. Now, that is not going to happen. So if you want to elect independents supporting MSPs as opposed to allowing Reform to enter Holyrood, then you need to vote for an alternative independence party on the list, or independence candidate on the list. Obviously, I want people to vote for the Alpha Party, but there are other choices available, and I'm not going to argue with that, and people vote for who they want to. But it is simply lunacy, if you want to see independence delivered, to vote for the SNP on the list, because there is absolutely, I can say this with confidence, there's absolutely no way the SNP are going to get 90% of the vote in any region in Scotland. And so anyone who advocates for an SNP list vote is asking you to throw your vote away, because it will not deliver an MSP. The only place that is remotely different, or stands a remote chance of being different really, is down in the borders, where there is a slim likelihood. But again, you're talking about a large contingent of votes for a single
political neutrality, that we invited the SNP.
So if you don't want Reform to get in, the best way to vote is to vote for another independent supporting party or candidate on the list. That is it. It's not confusing.
So we've heard from two politicians. Craig, you've just won the Scottish election, and you've now become First Minister.
Well done, sir.
About time too, actually.
Obviously, there will be a huge investigation how that happened. But what would be the first thing that you would propose to do as the new First Minister of the Scottish Parliament?
Declare independence.
Right answer.
I actually have no time whatsoever for Holyrood. I think it's a complete and utter waste of time, and was always a trap. And it's a trap in this sense that it's constrained to work within the UK economy and to work with the resources that the British state deigns to give you. Yeah. They take our taxes, they take our revenues, they take our energy, they take our oil, they take our gas, they take our fish, they give us a wee bit of money back to run our, which isn't enough money, and then they say you can't run your services because we can't, because they don't give us enough of our own money. Yeah. So it's a trap. It's always been a trap. I've got no interest whatsoever in attempting to run Scottish services from Holyrood. The only possible use of the Scottish Parliament is as a body to make the Declaration of Independence. And that is it.
So will you be standing in the election, miraculously become First Minister?
Yeah, well, I think it's miraculous.
You heard it here first, folks. We've got another candidate.
I think if I stand, it's very likely I shall become First Minister, but exactly what I'm doing is not quite certain yet.
And Yvonne, although I happen to think your talents may lay elsewhere, you planning on standing in the next election?
I do, yes.
Good. And so if you became First Minister, what would your first call of duty be?
Well, there would be two things. First, obviously, independence. But the second thing that I would do is dismantle the layout of that debating chamber, because it is not designed for democracy at all. You have the First Minister and deputies standing at the front with their backs to those who are asking the questions. You can't have a discussion the way we're talking now when you're responding to somebody who's talking behind. It's just, the whole setup is just configured wrongly, and it's as though they're sort of addressing Westminster and not the people who were democratically elected behind them. It's a terrible setup. And
So, apart from we're going to redecorate and change all the furniture, the Scottish Parliament has 129 MSPs. Is that sufficient to run an independent country? And what would be Scotland's standpoint on international issues?
I would say 129 isn't enough, but I would also say that running alongside a Holyrood Parliament would be a People's Parliament. Westminster has the House of Lords, which is for the privileged and the elite. We should have another Parliament with ordinary people from Scotland who can yank the MSPs back to the ground if they get too carried away. So I think a sort of People's Parliament, I'm not quite sure yet how I would figure it out, to work alongside, jigsaw in with the Holyrood Parliament would be an idea. And as for the international aspect, I think that I would create some sort of ambassador positions for the UN. Well, obviously there would be at least one seat in the UN for a Scottish ambassador, but to have a delegation of professional peacemakers,
Can I
lawyers.
say, Jim Sillars, many years ago, said something which at the time I thought was quite humorous and quite ridiculous. But he was saying that we should take the aircraft carriers that the UK had just built at a huge expense. This was before we knew they broke down all the time. And we were going to repaint them and refit them as global hospital ships. And then that is what Scotland's stance in the world should be, was a peacemaker. And instead of us sending warships over to bomb places and sink other people's ships, we should be sending a ship there as a hospital ship there to help people around the world. Do you think that is the sort of thing Scotland should be looking to do?
It would be a wonderful idea, but how would you deal with a rogue state like Israel? I was on a ship last week that should have gone to Gaza, but it was bombed by the Israelis. No thought at all for international law. But I do think, I really genuinely think, because of how I'd explained it before, that Scotland has a global role. Because, you know, wherever you go,
the Tartan army has already been there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and they are welcomed back, unlike some others. Now, we're running out of time. We've only got 2 minutes, but I wanted one other question that was handed to us. What are we going to do about free ports? Now, obviously, Colette here has no idea, because she's keeping all her good ideas for her session tomorrow, here in Hall B, I think it is? Hall B, tomorrow morning, 10:30 tomorrow. She's got a thing on free ports. So if you want to know all the details of free ports, come tomorrow. But a serious subject, because if they continue the way they're going, my understanding is that one, it blocks the UK from ever rejoining the EU, because we have a tax and regulatory black hole in our own territory, which means you can't join the EU. So what are we going to do about free ports? I'm going to ask Neil first.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I'll try and be very quick because you're running out of time. So, look, Things change, and lots of things need to change, and free ports are not the only fly in the ointment of an independent Scotland, and the EU is not the only destination that we can aim for. You know, they are a reality now. I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government threw their enthusiasm behind this. It was totally the wrong decision. But what we can't do now is interfere with the jobs that are being created, and let's hope that they're not as damaging as they are. And I'm not in any way being a proponent of them, but they are what they are, and we've got to deal with them. But like the contracts that were awarded under Westminster on oil, gas, wind power, and the like, they must be up for review immediately upon independence as part of the transition, and we must find a way to make sure that we get out of them.
We're running out of time. So, Craig, what are we going to do about free ports?
I think the entire notion is completely mad, logically. I mean, you have labour regulations, you have environmental regulations, you have tax rates for a reason. If your environmental and labour regulations and your tax rates are wrong, then they're wrong for the entire country. Exactly. They're not wrong in a 10-mile square zone. They should be, all those things should be the same about the whole country. If you need to reform them, but the idea that you have little places which are under a different regulatory environment than the rest of the country is absolutely stupid and shouldn't be thought of at all.
And Yvonne?
Well, I'm going to make a point of going to Colette's meeting tomorrow, but what I was told was that it would be the concertisation of jobs. And I was born in Concert, where there was a big thriving steel industry. It ended up being closed down, and Thatcher and co said, you're going to get good, clean jobs, and it's an enterprise zone, lots of money, lots of jobs, all the same that they're saying about free ports. And yes, those jobs were there, but they're all poorly paid. And so it's cheap labour.
Yeah. So, and Colette, it's a subject that you've been campaigning on for quite a while. So what are we going to do about free ports?
Well, first of all, we're actually going into our third year of campaigning about free ports, which I can't believe it's actually coming into our third year now. We've travelled down Scotland, we're still travelling around Scotland trying to educate people. And even to this day, it baffles, well, actually now it doesn't actually baffle us, but it did that people didn't know anything about them, because they're supposed to be this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, seemingly. But nobody knows about them, so if you thought that it was going to be something that was going to give economic growth to Scotland and to this fictional UK, then why is nobody talking about it within either the Westminster or the Holyrood Parliament? Because it's no such thing. It's privatisation on steroids. We are not seeing any benefit from it. So our job just now is travelling around the country, putting on our public meetings, coming to events like this, putting on events, doing stalls at rallies, and trying to get as many people educated so you can go away and you can actually tell your neighbours and your friends, have you heard about free ports, have you heard about special economic zones, what are you talking about? So we've got a stall just at the front door. We're going to be here for the 3 days. We've got information packs. I've made up an e-pack that I can email you with all the information. But again, tomorrow we've got our event, so please come along to that. But I think right now is about actually educating people what is actually happening, that you're not hearing from your parliamentary representatives in Holyrood or Westminster. And as I said earlier on, if you don't educate yourself with it, and if you don't vote people in that are against free ports and privatisation, we will not have a Scotland to fight for, because it will be decimated. Our resources are stolen, they're gone, you won't have anything to fight for.
It sounds like a bad idea, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, that's us for our very first Scottish Questions, which has almost gone without a hitch. And without a script as well, which is pretty amazing. Can I just ask us a round of applause for our panellists, Colette Walker of ISP, Neil Hanvey of the Alba Party, Craig Murray of no party, unfortunately, and Yvonne, who is also, I believe, in the Alba Party. Can you have a round of applause? Thank you. Right, folks, that's us. We're back tomorrow.
The bar's still open, I think.
Back tomorrow, nice and early.
See you tomorrow.
So the bar's still open. In fact, we might still be here. Yeah, let's, yeah.